You have done fantastic at this point. You've learned about hypnosis, you've learned how to do a pre-talk, engage in assessment, you've learned how to do an induction, you've practiced that induction, and you've learned a basic strategy for deepening. And now it's time to move into the suggestive therapy. Now, this is something that a lot of people have questions about. First of all, how do I make suggestions? How do I know essentially what to say during hypnosis? Well, this video is going to answer that question, and the successive videos are going to show you how to create and structure suggestions. Now, in my previous demonstration with Sheila, I actually used a very basic strategy in creating the suggestions. Again, I wanted you to see a conceptualization of the process. Today, I'm actually going to do another demonstration with Sheila, and we're going to go deeper, and I'm going to structure suggestions in a very specific way that you're going to be able to utilize as well. But now that we've done the induction, now that we've done the deepener, now that we're in that place that we call hypnosis, probably the very first suggestion I'm going to give is a suggestion that they are in hypnosis. Again, if we tell a person that they're in hypnosis, that this is the hypnotic state that they came here for, because we're in a position of authority and because they have no reason to doubt us, especially if we just counted from 10 backwards, it's a suggestion that essentially ratifies trance. So you can conceptualize it this way. I've done the pre-talk, I've done the induction, I've done the deepener, and my very next suggestion is this. And now that we've reached this place that we call hypnosis, this resource state that is available to you, you will continue to relax with each breath, continuing to experience success. And with each suggestion that I give you, acting on those suggestions in a way that creates opportunity and success for you. Now, I almost always give this suggestion as well. I will say something along the lines of, in fact, the suggestions I'm giving today are not suggestions that come from me. The suggestions that I'm giving today are actually suggestions that come from within you. You've come here today, you've asked me to work with you. And in doing so, you have actually told me what's most important to you. And so as we make progress through this session, recognize that the suggestions you hear from my voice are the desires from within your heart. Now, that's a very important suggestion as well, because what we've done is we've given them ownership of it. Again, it's not me doing something to them, it's me doing something with them. And hypnosis is often the ritual that ratifies the change which has taken place. And so I'm more than happy to give them ownership of their success. It empowers them and it leads to success. So let's talk a little bit about the suggestion that follows those suggestions. Really everything in hypnosis is a suggestion. Close your eyes, focus on a point on the far wall, double that sensation of relaxation, go deeper, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Everything we do in hypnosis is a suggestion. So those two suggestions after I do the deepener are then followed by a series of additional suggestions that typically relate specifically to what the presenting issue is, the presenting desire, the presenting problem. Now we can structure suggestions in a million different ways. In fact, I could teach a 45-hour-long semester course just on nothing but hypnotic suggestion and not run out of things to say. But in this series, in our gold level course, what I'm going to do is give you a very specific set of strategies for making meaningful suggestions. There are two primary ways of giving hypnotic suggestions. First, indirect suggestion. Indirect suggestion may be stories or parables or metaphors or poems or really anything that indirectly is a learning experience for the person to whom we are doing the session with. You probably have experienced this in your own life. You've read a poem or you've heard a song or some other meaningful piece of literature, and you brought the words of that song or literature or poem or whatever into your own life and sort of made it your own. In other words, you recognize that well, the Romeo and Juliet story may be talking about these two people. This relates to me in this way or another way. Okay, so great literature will do that. A poem, maybe there's a poem that has stuck in your head over the years or been particularly meaningful to you. The poet didn't write that to you. The poet probably didn't know that you existed. And yet that poem has been very important to you. Maybe it was something by Robert Frost or somebody else that had an important influence. Carol Croskery's poetry book is really among my favorites, and I use her poems as indirect suggestion frequently. Of course, we know that parables and stories and metaphor all work to help people make change. After all, we see this in the great religions of the world. Jesus, for example, is well known for, of course, speaking in parable, giving illustrative stories that create a point. And, of course, Aesop's fables, whether you learned about those in Western civilization courses in college and actually read Aesop's fables, or whether you watched I think it was Warner Brothers cartoons that were produced in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you know that these types of indirect suggestions can have real power. Now, Milton Erickson was, of course, a well-known psychiatrist who specialized in clinical hypnotherapy, and his approach is often described as indirect. He would share stories with individuals and, again, parables and metaphors, and the belief is this: that the subconscious mind is infinitely wise and that the subconscious mind will attach the meaning to these indirect suggestions that is most important for the receiver of the message. Now, this is really an interesting idea. It's very Rogerian in nature. The belief that the client has within them all of the resources that they need for success. What we're doing is we're activating this potential, we're uncovering this potential, we're giving our clients permission to take the action that they know is quite possible within their repertoire of resources that are already within them. And this is what indirect suggestion does. Now, there's also direct suggestion. And I think in a lot of hypnosis training courses, there are sort of two camps or a rivalry. Well, the indirect approach is best because the subconscious mind is infinitely wise. Well, no, the direct approach is most beneficial. That's true hypnosis. I have power, I give a suggestion, a person takes action on it. I think the reality is both are completely valid approaches. So the way I typically structure a session is this: I do my induction, I do my deepener, I give those two suggestions in one way or another, and then I move almost always into indirect suggestion. I find that indirect suggestion, especially if I'm sharing a parable or a story or a metaphor that has any length to it, actually becomes an additional deepening technique. And so I think there's value in it from that perspective as well. Then I will almost always do a transitional deepener. And a transitional deepener is simply back to, it's sort of, think of a callback in comedy, right? A comedian is doing a show, and 20 minutes into the show, he goes back to something he said earlier. That's called a callback in comedy, right? And it keeps the show running. Well, we do the same thing with a transitional deepener. Now that I've done my indirect suggestion, I might do a callback to that deepening technique and continue to imagine that you're on those stairs again, stepping down each step and going a little bit deeper. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Transitional deepener doesn't need to be very long. Doesn't even need to have the imagery. Simply be a number count, 3, 2, 1, 0, with no explanation, because we've already explained that earlier. They know what that means. So now that I've done a transitional deepener after my indirect suggestion, then I will go into direct suggestion. And direct suggestion is what people often think of it in hypnosis. And from this point forward, you will no longer smoke a cigarette, right? From this point forward, you will no longer eat a box of Twinkies. From this point forward, you will have confidence whenever you're in a public speaking situation. You will now notice that biting your fingernails is something you forget to remember or remember to forget. I mean, there are lots of different direct suggestions that could be given. From this point forward, whenever a car drives by, you'll no longer have a desire to chase after it, barking incessantly, scaring the driver of that car. So when we think of direct suggestion, these are the things that I am telling my client that they will or won't be doing. Now, let me have a couple words on direct suggestion before I, again, give examples both of indirect and direct suggestion. First of all, there are a lot of people out there who say the mind can't process a negative suggestion. In other words, do not smoke. No longer smoke. You will not like smoking. You will not like a cigarette. Those are negative suggestions. Okay, it's negative language. You won't do this. You won't experience this. This won't happen. This is not a part of your life. Those are you won't like. Okay, these are all negative suggestions, even if in the context of smoking, it's a positive thing. Okay, the language, the words that we use are negative words. I don't find that to be true. I think that is something that is sort of myth in the world of hypnosis. But because I'm a positive person and because I do believe that people are more inclined to follow a towards motivation, a positive motivation than a negative motivation or a pain motivation, but either way works, I do try to structure my direct suggestions so that they are positive. So for example, in working with a smoker, I might say this. Okay? You'll notice how wonderful it feels to breathe in fresh air. Notice I didn't even mention they weren't smoking. I just mentioned fresh air. The subconscious mind knows that you can't breathe in fresh air if you're breathing in carbon monoxide. Okay, so I've structured that as a positive suggestion. Let's do one for weight loss. Okay, and again, I'm going through this quickly. Don't worry, we're going to develop all of these themes in later videos. A negative suggestion would be, and when you go to the buffet, you'll only eat a small portion, refusing, the bounty of food that's offered to you, all right? Gosh, that's a negative suggestion. It seems like I'm giving something up. I'm probably not likely to follow that suggestion, but you would agree with me that that's a good idea if you're here for weight loss, correct? Right. So how can we structure that direct suggestion in a positive way? Well, from this point forward, whenever you find yourself at a buffet, you'll seize it as the opportunity that it is to make one or several of many different food choices that are healthy for you and in the correct portion for what your body needs and desires. So again, I can create a positive suggestion or I can create a negative suggestion. I kind of follow what I call an 80-20 rule. 80% positive suggestions with no more than 20% negative suggestions. But I think that we can have clients who are both motivated by a towards or a positive motivation or an away from or a pain orientation, a pleasure versus pain. And so I use predominantly positive suggestions. Now, I don't simply give one suggestion. I will almost always give 9 direct suggestions. So I've done the induction, I've done the deepener, I've done an indirect suggestion, and then I've done a transitional deepener, and now I will almost always give 9 direct suggestions. Now let me share with you the formula of these 9. There are actually 3 suggestions that I'm going to make, and I'm going to make the same suggestion 3 different ways. Okay, so I'm going to make 3 suggestions 3 different ways, and I'm probably going to make an auditory suggestion, a kinesthetic suggestion, and a visual suggestion. All right, so this there's actually a worksheet I'm providing for you, and it's actually a simple 1-page worksheet, maybe 2 with the explanation on it, but this is a sheet that I will often, when I get their payment, right, and they're filling out the forms, I'll sometimes take this sheet. I've done this a lot of times, so sometimes I don't use the sheet, but sometimes I do take one of these sheets with me, a piece of paper, and I'll actually go through these things and write these things down. So let me give you some examples of what I mean by 3 different suggestions, 3 different ways. Okay, so suggestion number 1 is they're going to eat less. Okay, and I'm going to do that in 3 different ways: an audio, a visual, and a kinesthetic. Suggestion number 2: they're going to drink more water. Okay, And I'm going to give that suggestion in 3 different ways: auditory, visual, and kinesthetic. They're going to increase their physical activity. Again, auditory, visual, and kinesthetic. So let's go with physical activity. Let's say that I'm going to give the suggestion that they're going to increase their physical activity. So how would I do that visually? And as you continue to relax, see yourself as you know you will be tomorrow, taking more steps tomorrow than today, and more steps the next day than tomorrow. Increasing your steps each and every day until you reach 10,000 steps a day. Okay? That was visual, see yourself. Okay? An auditory suggestion. And each day you'll listen to the voice inside of your own mind telling you to increase your activity. And it will be almost as if, without having to give it any thought, you choose to take a short walk or park a little bit further away. Hearing that voice inside of your head at the end of the day complimenting you for having taken action on the desire or the goal that brought you to today's session. All right, now how would we give increased activity as a kinesthetic suggestion? Okay. And each day you'll pay attention to the feelings in your body, the calves and the shins. And you'll be able to tell whether or not you've been taking enough action and getting enough activity. And you'll pay attention to the feeling of tightness and strength as each day you increase your physical activity. Okay. So the broad suggestion is increase activity, and I've given it in 3 different ways. That brings us to the subject of compounding. Okay. Compounding is the idea that when we give the same suggestions multiple times, people are more likely to respond to them. So let me give you an example from the non-hypnosis world of compounding. I have grown kids, and I know that some of you have kids. If you don't have kids, you were a kid once, and so you'll definitely be able to relate to this, right? Have you ever told a kid when you walk by the room and the room is messy, hey, your room is a mess, you have to clean up that room, okay? So clean up your room now. And you go back to doing whatever you were doing. And you walk by 20 minutes later, and they're still sitting on the floor of their room or their bed, and they haven't touched a darn thing. So you give the suggestion the second time, hey, I told you to pick up your room. You need to pick up the things in your room. I'm serious about it. So I'm going to come back in 15 minutes, and this room better be picked up, right? So you go about, you do whatever you need to do, and you come back 20 minutes later, and they still haven't touched anything. Now maybe you even raise your voice a little bit, and you say, oh my gosh, it's just a simple request. By the way, these are negative suggestions sometimes, so that's why it doesn't, or at least perceived that way. But go ahead and clean your room. I need you to do it. I really was serious about it. You're not getting any dinner if you don't clean your room, or whatever the idle threat the parents make is. Now you come back 20 or 30 minutes later, and while it's not perfect, there's at least a pathway through the middle of the room. In other words, we respond to multiple suggestions. This worked with me and speeding. I am the guy who is going the speed limit no matter where he's going. I am the jerk that you're behind that will not go 1 mile over the speed limit. I set my cruise control at the speed limit all the time. By the way, I just drove from Tulsa, Oklahoma to Las Vegas, Nevada, 1,290 miles of driving, 20 hours in the car of driving. I don't recommend that to anybody, and I never exceeded the speed limit. I mean, maybe a mile or 2 here and there, but I set the speed limit at the posted speed limit the entire way. Now, why? Is it because I'm such a law-abiding citizen? No. It's because about 15 years ago, I was driving a lot. I was doing a lot of training in a lot of different places, and I got 1 ticket for not wearing a seatbelt. I got another ticket for speeding. I think that was in Houston. And about 3 or 4 months later, I got another ticket for speeding at 6 o'clock in the morning north of Tyler, Texas, in the middle of nowhere, right? So I was going 8 miles over. And so now I had like 3 tickets. I think the seatbelt ticket probably didn't count as a moving violation, but I was still kind of worried about it and my auto insurance rates. And so I was driving from Lampasas, Texas to Burnet, Texas. And as I was driving down the road, the speed limit then on that road was on 281 was 55 miles an hour, and I got stopped. I got a ticket for going 67 miles an hour. It was on a Sunday. I was actually the associate pastor of a church in Lampasas, Texas. And so I was on my way home to Burnet, and I got a ticket for going, whatever that was, I think 11 miles over the speed limit. This was my third speeding ticket in a year. Now I was really beginning to worry. The next Sunday, the same cop and the same road, I got another ticket for going 72 miles an hour in that 55 mile an hour speed zone. Wow, 4 tickets. The police had given me the suggestion, do not speed or you'll get a fine. Do not speed or you'll get a fine. Do not speed or you'll lose your license. Do not speed. And it took me four tickets in a year, but I have not gotten a ticket since 1995. Maybe that was 1994 actually, and I never speed anywhere. So it is compounding suggestions that actually lead to success, which is why I give 3 suggestions 3 different ways. So this is the structure of hypnotic suggestion. There are a lot of other things we can do, from visualization to experiential ideas, but again, in this gold level hypnosis certification program, these skills are sufficient to really help you experience success with your clients. Now I'm going to delve a little bit deeper both into indirect suggestion as well as additional examples of creating direct suggestion.